sometimes.
Yeah, really.
Okay, good.
Okay, let me take this little reminder.
Nice to meet you. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Have you heard it? Have you checked
Yeah,
it
I
out, or
have.
just
Yeah. A while ago, like I've kind of haven't had a lot of time of late to be listening to podcasts between a 2.5-year-old daughter and a book and campaign. But it
Yeah.
was definitely on my list when I had a bit of time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can understand that
Mhm.
that you really do have your hands full in a big way.
Yeah. Like life goes in different cycles, I guess, and I think at the moment, being a mother of a toddler and trying to run business, it's definitely got its challenges.
Yeah, I would say so. Did you say she's 2 years old?
Yeah, she's 2.5 now. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I've been there. I'm the father of 4 and now about to be grandfather of 6.
Oh my God, that is
Yeah.
truly amazing.
So I can tell you there is life on the other side.
That's really 4 kids is like I actually can't even comprehend that in my.
Of course, I also had a lot of help from my wife, and
Yeah.
two of those kids were twins to make things
Oh my
more
God.
challenging. We thought we were done. We thought we were done
Oh,
having
did you get?
kids.
Did you
We
get
had
twins at
2.
the? You had got
At,
twins at the end.
yes, at the end as a complete shocking surprise.
Oh my God, that's
But
just one of those things. I mean, it's like it's a blessing, but at the
it turned out
time,
to be one.
you'd just be like completely freaking out.
Yeah, before they came, I was completely freaking out. And people would say, oh, it's going to be such a blessing. And so then I did something that you'll be proud of, is instead of going around and moaning to people how I felt trapped and set upon and all, I decided, okay, it's up to me to change the story. So
Yeah.
I will do this as if. And I started going around saying, hey, guess what? I'm going to have twins. And, if I had gone with the original impulse of weeping and moaning, people would have supported that. And they would say,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, that's too bad. Poor you. But because I decided to go the other path,
Yeah.
I got a lot of support. Oh, that's wonderful. We have twins in our family, etc. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was a real lesson, in that.
That is very powerful. And it
Yeah,
is a big
yeah.
lesson. It's like the stories we tell will be supported. So we grow more negativity or we grow more positivity. Yeah.
Yeah. So as I said in my email, I hope you'll throw in lots of your stories as we go along.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm more than happy to. I mean, I'm a very kind of, I don't know, I guess I like my privacy, and it's a really interesting world that we're living in right now, isn't it? Like in terms of boundary of personal and public. But I think that I'm very mindful of what stories actually serve people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, what are the personal stories that are going to be of service to the people listening,
Yeah. Well, I've jumped off the deep end on that. Having been doing this for 13 years. And
you're pretty much like, there is no public-private.
I put a lot of my stories out there.
Mm.
Okay, so if you're ready to go, I will welcome you and you say some version of thank you, and then we'll be off and running. How's that sound?
Can I just ask you, hang on, 2 questions.
Sure.
Just remind me, I've got time, so it's fine, but just remind me how long we're going for.
About an hour.
An hour, yeah.
We might run out sooner than that. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, that's fine. Around an hour. And I think that was it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got one for you. Is it Biaylew?
Yeah, I know, it's a shocker. It's Biaylew. It's the Bain. It's Biaylew. Biaylew. Like bail you out of jail.
Biaylew. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd listened to a couple of interviews with you on YouTube, hoping to pick up the name.
Oh,
people said it so fast that it was.
Yeah. It's Polish heritage. It's of Polish origin. But when we came to Australia, no one can say Bialylew, which is how it's pronounced in Polish. So.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm about to welcome you, and we'll get started. Okay.
Great.
Dr. Elise, I know I'm going to stumble over this name, Biaylew. Okay. Dr. Elise Biaylew, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great having you here. And mindfulness is a topic that we've often touched upon in a variety of interviews. And you have embraced mindfulness in such a big way, having created a very large mindfulness training program called Mindful in May, a training in mindful meditation. And also you've just published a book called The Happiness Plan. But before we jump into those two topics, tell us a bit about your background.
So I am Australian, born and bred. I grew up in Melbourne. And from a very young age, I'm not sure why, I was really, really fascinated with the big questions. I remember being literally 4 or 5 and having distinct thoughts before I was going to sleep at night about what does it all mean? What is this thing, life? And what am I supposed to do? And what happens when you die? And, you know, all of these big existential questions. And those questions kind of stayed with me as I grew. And I guess also then certain circumstances in my life that were in some ways quite difficult amplified that curiosity. One of those being the fact that I suppose I come from a background of having grandparents that went through the Holocaust. And so,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, so from a very young age, I was really exposed to the stories and I suppose a loss of innocence around recognizing that there's a lot of suffering in the world. And with the mind of a child, also some confusion around why do humans do this to each other, you know, in that very just innocent, curious way. I remember when my grandmother was telling me stories, you know, of our family and the losses. She lost 8 of her siblings in the Holocaust and her parents, you know, so it was just such a unfathomable trauma. And
well, you and I share something in common there. My biological father, who I did not grow up with, was in fact Jewish. And so I don't know the stories on that side of the family, but I'm certain that, that a bunch of my relatives also perished in the Holocaust. And my mother told me about this background that I wasn't aware of sometime around the age 14. And I vowed at that point I would never tell anybody that I was Jewish, because I looked Jewish and I grew up in a non-Jewish environment, and people were always saying, "What are you? You look Jewish." And oh no. I was a denier, really, until finally I got into graduate school and started to study psychology, and I realized secrets we pay a price for having the secrets. And so I came out at that point to a woman who I was in graduate school with, who was Jewish, and she said, "Oh, I knew there was something good about you." And boy, that just paved the way for me of self-acceptance after that, to get that sort of wonderful welcome.
Yeah, it's interesting, the stories that we hold that somehow we may not even realize we're holding shame about, or you know, that when we're not integrating and we're not owning parts of ourselves and our story, and as you say, how that can kind of have effects in quite powerful ways.
Now go ahead.
Oh, so no, just to finish, so I was going to say that I suppose, just growing up with already a sensitivity and a kind of curiosity around the big questions, that just seems to be how I was wired. And then that meeting my external circumstances of having grandparents that went through the Holocaust. I actually lost a very close friend when I was about 10 to leukemia, and that was another sort of loss of innocence. I think facing death, you know, facing mortality.
Yeah.
Some of these things came together, and I only realized this in retrospect, that they were quite formative. And then later down the track, the other formative aspect of my trajectory was traveling quite extensively through developing countries in my 20s, and really coming face to face with global poverty and feeling just completely despairing about that as well.
Yeah. And I see that experience is reflected in your work now, and we'll get to that in a bit. I'm curious, though, What did you end up majoring in as an undergraduate in college?
So when I finished school, I went straight into medicine, and that was, I went into medicine with quite a clear idea that I wanted to become a psychiatrist. And that was something that I think that there was quite a strong influence that I had from my mother, who was a psychologist, and my dad, who was a doctor. So it was sort of like a combo of the two. But yeah, I had ideas about what psychiatry was, and so I went through medicine and then ended up specializing in psychiatry.
And then you, I gather you stepped out of that training quite near the end. What led to that?
Yeah, that was a good story. That was one of those stories of you've got plans and then life has other plans for you.
Yeah, right.
So look, I was studying in psychiatry again. I was really interested and quite obsessed with understanding as much as I could about the human brain. It was really this moment. I start off my book sharing this moment where in medical training, this moment of holding a brain in my hand was completely just this miracle moment of trying to comprehend it all, you know. And so went into psychiatry and was learning a huge amount and really valuing a lot of what I was learning. But there was a part of me that was becoming increasingly unfulfilled with what I wasn't learning, which was actually what does the brain and the mind look like when it's flourishing and thriving, and how do we actually teach people how to develop a mind and a brain and a heart that is reaching its fullest potential. Whereas in psychiatry, I was day in, day out, I was facing humans whose brains and minds had really spiraled downwards into the worst place they could possibly be. And I was helping lift them, you know, off the brink of death, really, to okayness. But I was really discovering that what I wanted to be doing was more than that. I wanted to then take that journey further. And so I stumbled upon meditation. I knew about meditation from a young age. My mum was very interested in this. I grew up with the books on the bookshelf, you know, Jack Cornfield and Don Kabat-Zinn. So I was primed around this, but I was being someone that was very busy and active. Meditating was sort of the actual act of meditation was something I think that I probably resisted for a long time. And it wasn't until later when I was training in medicine that I really discovered I needed a practice. So came to that. And then through that study, firstly, just came upon the most extraordinary teachers that seemed to embody everything that I valued and that I wanted to become in my life, you know. And then also just, you know, I'd spent my whole career looking at the mind and the brain from this way out, and suddenly I was turning everything inward and discovering the mind through investigating my own mind and really learning things that I had never learned in psychiatry, which I felt were just absolutely crucial to us as humans. And we all have minds, and discovering actually how they work and how we can use them in a way that supports our happiness rather than takes us down into greater suffering.
Let me ask you, such as, can you put words to one of the things that you learned in that process?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I learned, and I think that people learn particularly through something like mindfulness meditation training, is that whereas before that training, we take everything that comes into our mind, all the thoughts, all of the little internal narrative as us and as the authority on the matter. Mindfulness teaches us that, you know, just like the heart beats, the mind and the brain think, and they're constantly spewing out these thoughts that we really don't have control over what emerges in our mind, but we do have control about how we're then relating to that when it emerges. Are we getting hooked into it and sort of sunk in the quicksand of it, or can we actually choose and recognize that we have an opportunity to move our attention somewhere else and to let these thoughts go? So for me, that was a complete revelation, because it meant, you know, just to bring it down to a very practical level so that the listeners, I mean, I know many of your listeners already practice meditation, but, you know, just for example, I don't know, like waiting for a medical test to come back. You know, we all have medical tests. And for me as a doctor, that used to absolutely terrify me because I know all the different things that can go wrong. And with mindfulness, it was the ability to recognize the thoughts, the fear thoughts that are coming up in that moment. And rather than, you know, getting lost into the spiral of anxiety, actually taking a moment and going, oh, fear is here. This is a fear thought. And redirecting my attention to my body, to sensations, to sounds around me, and just disconnecting from that thought, letting it go. So, and we know that thoughts have such a powerful impact on our physiology. So we know that, you know, some of these anxiety thoughts, it's a spiral that we have them, and then they trigger our fight or flight response. They make us more fearful, generating more fearful thoughts. So if we have a tool that we can actually get smart with our thoughts and become more of a master around managing them, that's life-changing.
Yeah. Now, somehow this morphed into your creating something called Mindful in May, the Mindful in May program. Tell us about that and what it is.
Sure. So I guess it really originated, it emanated actually in a meditation practice, which sounds cliched, but I think it's a great story because I really do believe that this whole practice offers us channels into deeper creativity and integration. And so for me, that was what Mindful in May was. You know, I'd spent quite a number of years feeling a bit stuck in my career and a little bit off path, and I didn't know how to change that. I wasn't sure how to move, and you know, I just stuck with my meditation, was going on quite a few retreats. And then one day I was in meditation and bang, this idea came up, Mindful in May. And it was really about integrating 3 of my different passions, which was mindfulness and offering these tools on a larger scale. Because at the time I was just doing like more one-on-one training or small in-person groups. It was also bringing in that social impact, the humanitarian side of things, the giving back, and then harnessing technology to bring community together. So Mindful in May, in essence, is it's an online global 1-month mindfulness training program, and it features some of the world's best mindfulness teachers. And so people register and then they get a 1-month program where they get regular meditation, guided meditations and video interviews and teachings. But the overarching thing is that they're doing it for themselves and for a greater cause. So just like you can do a marathon, like a running marathon, and people often do that and then get sponsored to dedicate that to something bigger, because it's obviously a big physical challenge. With Mindful in May, there's an acknowledgement that for many people, meditating on a regular basis is really quite a challenge, particularly in this day and age. And so sometimes we need greater accountability and motivation. So the idea is coming together in community and getting sponsored. That's an optional, but basically getting sponsored to commit to doing 10 minutes a day, every day for the month. And so then the idea is it's a clear mind for you and clean water for others, because we raise money for clean water projects in developing countries. Yeah,
wow. Where does your entrepreneurialism come from? Is there some of that in your background? Because you've done this on such a large scale now. How many people have gone through this program?
Well, it's tens of thousands, yeah. So it's been going for 4 years, and each year we have sort of over 35 countries participating. And yeah, so it's pretty well. But I would attribute that to the power. I really feel like we're living in such a fabulous age where there is technology that can just reach across the globe. You know, I mean, not to underestimate, not to sort of play down how hard the work is on the back end, but yeah, I think that we live in this interconnected global world now where you really can reach people, and I think that this is obviously also something that people are really needing.
You're in Australia, and yeah. And I'm in California. You're in the Melbourne area, right?
Yeah.
And so that's remarkable. And we're doing kind of what you were talking
exactly.
about.
We're just having this But can I just add to the entrepreneurial question for your listeners? I think it's really important to say that when I started Mindful in May, first of all, it was an idea that I had that I approached with a level of playfulness. And so I really, my whole life until that point, I'd been very sort of outcome driven. So it was like I was studying medicine and I knew I was going to get here and I was going to become a psychiatrist. It was all kind of mapped out. And I think mindfulness as well gave me a skill to be much better at managing uncertainty, and that opened up this capacity for entrepreneurialism, like, because it gave me tools to manage, the fear of uncertainty, having a bit more courage, sitting with uncomfortable feelings, which I think is essential when you're doing something entrepreneurial that you just have no idea where it's going to go. So that was it was a real turning point for me. Yeah.
Well, good for you. So tell us about the water. I'm very interested in the water program. And I guess this comes out of the travels that you were speaking about earlier and the poverty that you encountered.
Yeah. So when I was 20 or 21, I was really fortunate to have this opportunity to go to West Africa. I went actually to study drumming. I was really passionate about percussion, and I went to Guinea-Conakry in West Africa, and I remember sort of flying over Guinea, and all I could see was like dirt road. There was one road down the whole country, and it was sort of foggy and polluted, and I had this thought, what the hell am I doing? Where am I about to be landing? And landed, and the first thing I noticed was, driving out of the airport, everyone walking around with these yellow containers on their heads, literally just everywhere. And they looked like petrol tanks, and they actually were petrol tanks. And I just had no idea what this was. And very quickly I discovered that this was people carrying water, and then learnt that, water is a massive problem. Accessing clean, safe drinking water is a huge problem in these countries. And women predominantly, bear the burden of this, because they're spending like half a day walking to distant places and then carrying these 25-kilo tanks on their heads to take back to their communities to have water for the day. And not to mention the many diseases that are happening through water, contaminated water-related illnesses. So, and I lived with a family in Guinea for a couple of months, and I was witnessing this problem and also witnessing, the sickness and the illness and all of the things that come from this. And at the time, I really felt the poverty in West Africa was so confronting, and that sense of I could never make a difference. I'm just one person, like I can't, this is just too big, this global poverty. And but also experiencing the incredible generosity from the family that I was living with, for example, they'd cook lunch and then they'd bring the lunch to us first, and just incredible hospitality and generosity amidst the most complete poverty. So that's really where I guess I was exposed to this. And then it took a long time for me for that to sort of bubble up in any way that was meaningful and impactful. And, it was just about the first year of Mindful May was let's try and raise enough money to build one water well. So that was $30,000, and we did that. We actually surpassed that. And then like each year it's just grown and grown. So I think the moral of the story is that we can, as individuals, we really, really can make a difference. And it's not about solving an entire problem, but it's just chipping away as best you can.
Wow. So I was imagining jugs of water being sent, but in fact, you are drilling wells. Is that right?
Yeah. So what happens with Mindful May is I've been partnering with Charity Water, which is an organization based in America. And the reason I chose to partner with them is because when Mindful May started, they were extremely innovative, and they had a way of structuring their organisation that 100% of the funds that they receive will go to the projects. And they also did a really great job at connecting the donors to the outcome. So each year through Mindful May, once we've raised the funds, 18 months later we get a report, we get photos, and we get GPS location of exactly where these wells have been built in different communities. So it just gives people who are participating a really great sense of the tangibility of what their contribution has done.
Oh, yeah. How many wells has your program created at this point?
I have to double check this because I've forgotten the number off the top of my head. We've just had new wells come in, but there's been projects, like multiple projects built in Ethiopia, Rwanda, Mali, Uganda, and actually Nepal and Malawi. Yeah, so that's over 10,000. Over 10,000 people have received clean water, and that's for life, which I think is quite extraordinary. And so, it actually costs about $50 to bring one person clean water for life through these projects.
Wow, that's really impressive. And so to do that, you have to generate some money. And one way that you do that is you charge for a month-long meditation course, which was part of the Mindful in May program that you were talking about.
That's right. Yeah. So what happens is it's $49 for people to actually register for Mindful in May, and that gets them access to the program, so the program for the month. And then there's the option to come on board to make a difference. So I've kind of created it so that, for people that are are not in a position to be able to give, they can still potentially access the program. But the invitation is really about, doing something for yourself, doing something for the world. And the program, the Mindful May program is, it's sort of heavily discounted at that particular time of the year so that it's really accessible.
Oh, I was wondering about why May, Mindful in May.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was inspired by... Well, it was either going to be Mindful in May or Mindful in March. And actually, like in the Southern Hemisphere, it's winter in May, and it started in the Southern Hemisphere. And I thought that winter was a nice time to be contemplative. March in Australia, it's now that it's global, it doesn't really matter so much. But March is a more hot time of the year, and I really find that the seasons are really supportive of different states of mind. So it ended up being Mindful in May.
So is the course then going year-round, not just in May? Maybe it gets a bigger push in May?
No, so the course, this particular program is only available in May, but then I offer a follow-up program on the back of Mindful in May, because what I discovered is people wanted to keep going. They've developed this practice. So I offer what's called the Mind Life Project membership, and that's a 1-year ongoing program that people can continue with off the back of Mindful in May. And that's been a really wonderful community that's developed, again, like from people around the world, and we meditate online. I run a guided meditation once a month, and we have a Facebook community. So there's sort of a community of practice that comes off the back of Mindful in May.
Wow, fantastic. So $49 actually is a bargain, I would say, given all that you provide, because you have, I gather you've approached a lot of the luminaries in the mindfulness training arena. People who are fairly famous, and you've got videos that you make available to people who sign up for the course. Is that right?
That's right. So I do sort of a 45 to 1 hour video interview, and the interviews are really based on sort of techniques and practices. So, I've interviewed all of those leaders who inspired me and who were really the authors that were sitting on the bookshelf in my mum's bookshelf when I was, 12 or 13. And it's been an absolute privilege to be able to do that. So, Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein, and then some of the scientists, so Richie Davidson and Sarah Lazar. So that's really what I'm passionate about, bringing the teaching, the mindfulness teaching and the science, and sort of bringing them together in an accessible way, so that all people can understand the impact of this. And then, designing a program that invites people to just do 10 minutes a day, recognizing that for most people, we're feeling really, really busy, and committing to anything more than that when you're starting can be really, really difficult. And I think something actually to add there, which was that, this question about how long do you need to meditate to feel the benefits of the practice, that's been a really common question. And so a couple of years ago, I did the first research study on Mindful in May to actually look at, was 10 minutes a day for 1 month actually measurable in terms of the benefits people were experiencing? And we found that it was. Now, just to be clear, it was not a randomized controlled trial, which is sort of the gold standard of research. It was a pilot study, and it was a sort of survey-based. We got 200 people, did a pre-survey and a post-survey, and statistically significant was improvements around ability to perceive stress more effectively and manage it more effectively, a reduction in negative emotions and an increase in positive emotions, and a sense of greater compassion and focus. And we also discovered that the more, because I offer bonus meditation, so the more time people were practicing each day, the greater was the effect. But 10 minutes a day for 1 month was proven to be to bring benefits to people.
What do you think about guided meditation versus a more private, open-ended, internal meditation?
In terms of sitting in silence and doing sort of your own practice?
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think that particularly for beginners, people that are newer to meditation or mindfulness, I think that the guided practices are essential, because otherwise you don't really know what you're supposed to be doing with your eyes closed or open. And then I think as you progress, I find that some people can feel that the guided practice actually gets in the way, and it sort of they're better off sitting in silence and just focusing on the breath once they know what they're doing. I think it's a personal thing. I think for me, actually, I've been doing this for quite a long time now. There are actually some days I mix it up. For me, I often sit in silence, but there are some days when I just feel that I need that extra support. And so I like, I like to use guidance as well. And I also like to experience different teachers have different ways of guiding, which I find can be really beneficial.
Okay. And before we started the interview, we were having a bit of a chat, and I found out that you're a mom as well, a mother of a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
how's that?
Is it difficult finding space to meditate in and around?
Yeah, it really, look, it's what I'm doing at the moment, like juggling the Mindful in May and just having written this book and being with a toddler. It really is very challenging, and I have to admit, it's a balance that I juggle with every week. I'm trying to kind of, okay, I need a bit more time with my daughter and I need a bit more time for my business. It really is a struggle. It's a struggle. And particularly, you asked about meditation practice. It really is a non-negotiable for me, the meditation practice. But I've found that as a busy mum, I've had to get just more adaptive and smarter and more flexible around how I'm practicing. So for me, to find 40 minutes straight in a day is just it's just not possible at the moment. It's just not possible.
Yeah,
so my practice has changed at the moment. So I feel that I am much more about putting in regular practices throughout the day. So it might be, like before we got on this call, I did a 10-minute practice. Then, before I go to sleep at night, I'll do another 10 or 15-minute practice, because I find I'm so racy by the end of the day. So it's about kind of integrating it. And I also find in motherhood, it has just been absolutely invaluable. Like, I actually can't imagine being a mother without these tools. When my daughter's having a tantrum, or, the big emotions that your children can trigger in you, just having a tool to manage my own emotions has been really, really helpful.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your sharing all of that challenge and how you're dealing with it, and not kind of sugarcoating it as life continues to come at us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All of its challenges. Yeah.
And I think one of the other biggest things that has transformed me and my life through mindfulness training has been the self-compassion piece, because through all the teachers I've had and from what I've read and understand, the self-compassion is such a large component of this mindfulness practice. This being gentle to yourself and recognizing that we are all imperfect, and that makes it a lot easier to forgive yourself when you've mucked up or when you've responded in a way that you feel less than proud about. And I feel that capacity to be kind to myself and forgive myself when I've stuffed up, and have a sense of humor about the fact that I'm teaching meditation and running this campaign. And sometimes, I lash out at my partner when I'm under pressure, and I just look at myself and I'm like, you should do better than that. But then it's like, I'm a human being, and just like everyone else, we all stuff up.
Yeah, sure. It's amazing how sort of direct that is. I think a whole lot of psychotherapy in the past has kind of often gotten to the sort of a core understanding that people are too hard on themselves and too judgmental on themselves, and the end result often is one of not so much discovering hidden things as much as just ending up at a place of more self-acceptance. And it seems like mindfulness meditation skips a lot of that and just kind of goes directly to that place.
Yeah, I think so. And I've seen that through, when I was working in psychiatry and actually running meditation programs with people that had really been suffering very chronically, addiction, alcohol addiction, chronic depression. They were on multiple medications, and watching them go through a 2-month mindfulness program. I mean, that's what led to me changing, jumping ship and moving over here, because I was really amazed at the transformation that was happening, and these windows of like a new perspective opening up for people. And a lot of it has to do, as you're saying, with just the growing of this compassion and this, it sounds a bit touchy-feely, but self-love, at a really profound level, like self-kindness, self-love. And I think that is the most healing, transformative ingredient that we can give to ourselves.
Yeah. Well, let's find out a little bit more about your book, The Happiness Plan. One of the chapters in your book was about managing meditation's obstacles. I guess you've just given us a list of some of the obstacles you've been dealing with. What are some of the other obstacles that have come up with people?
Yeah, well, the good thing is that, as is known, mindfulness practice and training obviously originates from very old practices, more than 2,500 years old, from the Buddhist contemplative practices. And, there's really a whole manual there from so long ago about the known predictable course that you're going to go on if you follow this training. And in that is a description of the common, they call it the common hindrances that come up. And I just find that so reassuring that people 2,000 years ago were dealing with the same difficulties that we would deal with in meditation. And so, a couple of those, and I write more about them in the book, but a couple of those are simply, sleepiness and agitation. So when we're practicing, falling asleep, which many people can relate to, or just a sense of agitation. And so, in the ancient teachings, there's a prescription of what to do when these obstacles come up. And
what do they recommend?
So with sleepiness, it would be, taking a layer of clothing off, like making sure you're not too warm, practicing with your eyes open. You could even stand up and practice. So there's ways of sort of overcoming that fatigue and that almost checking out that happens when we practice. The other one is simply that recognizing that you might be exhausted and actually allowing yourself to have a nap, not being hard on yourself when you're falling asleep in meditation. Right. I know for myself, when I've gone on these longer silent meditation retreats, usually the first 2 days out of the 7, I'm sleeping most of the day. Like I'm sitting there meditating. And I used to get really kind of frustrated with myself. But then I just realized, this is just allow things to be as they are. This is how they are right now. So that's that. And then
report kind of a 3 days to get into it.
Absolutely.
That it takes a long time to kind of shed all the burdens of day-to-day civilization.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then another one of the common hindrances is restlessness, which again, I've been through all of these. It's true, they come up. And so restlessness is often, one technique that you can use is actually bringing when you do a breath meditation, rather than keeping your attention, you can focus your attention on the nostrils or the abdomen. It's much more settling, and this is described in the text, that you can bring your attention down to the abdomen, and that somehow brings the energy down and sort of has more of a calming effect. And also when there's a lot of agitation and restlessness in the mind, the technique of counting the breaths can really help to anchor the attention and sort of, rather than having many different thoughts, you've got one thought, which is the counting, and that sort of stabilizes the mind. It's been often referred to as, the wild horse, and you want to kind of contain that. So there's different techniques. Another one of my favorite hindrances, which I experienced a lot through my training, was doubt. And that's like,
well, that's pretty huge. Yeah. What's the point of this? Yeah.
Doubt about the practice, doubt about your teacher, just doubt. And I think doubt is one of the trickiest ones to work with, because, you know, when you're faced with doubt, it's just the rug gets pulled from under you. So you really need, that's like, you really have to see that one and manage that quite carefully.
Yeah. What are the recommendations that come to us from the ancients on that score?
About the doubt?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is one about actually practicing loving kindness. So as an antidote to kind of just cultivating sort of loving kindness for yourself, because it's a really difficult mind state to be in. And then the other tip around that, which I found very helpful, is putting a putting a constraint around it. So, for example, I was on a retreat, and this was one of the earlier retreats that I did, and I went to my teacher and I said, I don't even know if I should be here. I don't know why, you know, I don't even meditate, you know, this isn't for me. And I was really quite distressed. And he said, look, can you allow the doubt to be there, and just like allow it to be there and not have to come up with an answer until the end of this retreat, you know? So rather than getting caught up in the whole investigation and analysis, which is really just the state of doubt in your own head, and it actually disengages you from the practice. It really interferes in you making progress. So can you actually just allow the doubt to be there and sort of compartmentalize it? And I found that really helpful. And the other thing about doubt is just checking into the body and noticing what's going on in the body when doubt is present. And because often there's a lot of tension and contraction, and coming back into the body and releasing and relaxing in the body can be quite helpful as well.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a good question to ask you or not. I feel a little guilty asking you the question, but do you have plans going forward? Do you see this, what you're involved in now, growing in certain ways, or certain ambitions that you have for it?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, you know, I was chatting to a friend recently about the idea of a 5-year plan. Like, you know how people make a 5-year plan of goals and what have you. And I honestly believe that the world that we are living in right now is changing so rapidly that the idea of planning 5 years ahead is completely ludicrous, because you don't even know what this world's going to look like in 5 years. One of my favorite futurists, I really love the work of Ray Kurzweil. He's an American futurist, and
I know him.
Yeah, he runs the Singularity University, which I'd love to go and visit one day. But anyway,
right.
He made this comment one day saying, I heard him say in a talk, you know, what was it? Something like a child in the developing country with a mobile phone right now has access to more information than the President of the United States had only 15 years ago. So what's going on is just so rapid and extensive that it's really hard to make plans. So to answer your question directly, I feel like I go sort of year to year and I see what's happening, and I'm aware of the landscape, and I'm seeing, you know, there's technologies changing. I'm always asking myself, is this still relevant? You know, is this project still relevant? Is it still serving? And I'm a bit more of a kind of year to year planner rather than a kind of, you know, long-term thinker. I really hope that I can continue to just grow, that, you know, Mindfully Made, this community can continue to grow and have a positive impact. But, you know, as mindfulness has taught me, it's really about like not holding on too tight to things and being willing to see what the reality is in front of you and making decisions according to that. So I'm a bit fluid with it.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. Two things. I want to relate to that and to what you were saying about Kurzweil and technology. I just came from a 2-day conference called the World Fair Nano, which had a wonderful lineup of speakers. Each person was confined to 20 minutes to speak, CEOs and a lot of people who work in technology. and lots of exhibits around of current technologies. And so I'm really, I've always been sort of a technophile on the one hand, and also concerned about the dark side of technology as well, and trying to hold those two. So I definitely relate to that part. And the part about not planning, I had no plan for Shrink Wrap Radio. I've never had a plan. And now it's like 13 years and 600 or 700 interviews plus, and it's just kind of evolved.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, there was no plan, and yet it feels like it has served people, in ways that I didn't even foresee.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I completely can resonate with that. What actually came to mind is the work of Parker Palmer. I don't know if you interviewed him.
I don't think so. Tell me about him.
I'm interviewing him in a few weeks for Mindful in May. I'm so thrilled to have him on the program. His book, so he's an educator, spiritual teacher, a writer. He's written a number of books. I'd recommend every single one of them. I've read them all more than once. One of his books that I reread recently is called Hidden Wholeness, and he talks about many things, but one of the lines he has is finding a role that fits your soul, or something like that. He's all about aligning your inner world with your external work and finding that real alignment. And I think what you're saying and what I'm saying is this idea of, when you stumble upon work in the world that is really an expression of what you most value and who you are, I think you just kind of ride that wave until it doesn't feel like that anymore.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but his work, I mean, I'm sure some of your listeners would have read his books, but for those who haven't, that is just an absolute gold discovery, and I'm excited for anyone to read those books. Yeah.
Well, I think I've probably heard his name in the past, and I'll take that as a clue from the universe that this is somebody that I need to interview as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you for that gift. I think I probably run out of questions here. Is there anything that we haven't gotten to that you would like to get out there?
No, look, I think we've covered so much. It's been a real pleasure. I think, I imagine that your audience, given the kind of interviews and content that you're sharing, would know this, but just for anyone that maybe hasn't stumbled upon this brilliant fact, I would say that, mindfulness, obviously it's everywhere now and it seems to be this kind of big trend, but I really believe, like, as a doctor and someone who's trained in the brain and covered a lot of the science in this space, this is not going away. This is not a trend. I really believe that we are at a pivotal moment of a paradigm shift around how we're really understanding what we need to do to maintain optimal well-being and happiness. And, there's over 1,000 studies that are coming out each year around mindfulness and its benefits. But one that I'd like to leave your listeners with, which was from Richie Davidson a couple of years ago, was just the one that really blew my mind, which was that he discovered that one day of mindfulness practice, one day of meditation practice, so an intensive day, was enough to actually change the genetic expression of the body, specifically around proteins that are related to inflammation in the body. So this means that, and this is just the beginning of that particular research, but this is really looking at the field of epigenetics and the behaviors and the practices that we do on a regular basis and how that's actually changing the way our genes express themselves to some extent. And I think that's an incredibly exciting field, because for many of us, we think, we're just destined, we're victims of our own inheritance, and to some degree that is true with certain illnesses and conditions, but there's a vast space there in which we have the power to actually, develop our bodies and our minds in really positive ways.
Well, that's a great wrap-up statement, so I'm really glad that you've shared that with us. And Dr. Elise Biaylew, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you so much. It's been such a delight to meet you and to have the conversation.
Yeah, great.